facing all of us, which might include getting you to dinner on time, because this is the session before dinner. Now, this conversation on brain drain and global talent is no different, and I have brilliant panelists who I will now invite to join me on stage, starting with Cassie Freeman. Cassie? Cassie is the president and CEO of the African Diaspora Consortium. Next, I'll call up Paulo Gomez, who's the chairman. I think we all need to hire our fan club and take them with us. So Paulo is the chairman of Paulo Gomez and Partners. And last but not least, by no measure, is Dr. Nkosana Moyo, founder and chairman of the Mandela Institute for Development Studies. So the framing of the brain drain conversation assumes a loss to the countries of origin of the skilled workers, to the destination country, and sometimes displacement of the local or native workers. Our intention here is to explore a third, possibly multiple ways of ensuring gains all round. The current affairs context for this is fraught. Just last week, the UK, one of my countries, announced stricter rules for immigration. And in another of my countries, Kenya, the government there is looking for countries to export its youth to in search of employment opportunities. In Germany, where I now live, the government is struggling to attract and retain foreign skilled workers. And so my first question is to you and the audience. Please take out your phones and go to the interactivity feature. And my question to you is, what factors should mobility schemes for foreign highly skilled workers consider to benefit their countries of origin? And please pay attention to the New South, because we're dealing with the Atlantic Basin, even though we know that there's also movement within the developed world of skilled workers. What factors are we overlooking? Democracy gatekeepers, okay. Tipping points. No, that's the old one, huh? Yeah, I was wondering why that's showing up here. Okay. I think we need to clear that. I'll start with you, though. I'll wait for them to clear that, and then I'll come back to you, if that's all right. But help us understand our context, Nkosana, because you've worked abroad, and then you returned. And what we hear sometimes is that Zimbabwe, where you come from, is one of the net exporters of skilled workers, particularly within the medical profession, to countries like the UK and Germany. A lot of the nurses come from Zimbabwe. Give us a sense of what it is we're discussing and why this is such a huge problem for us within the Atlantic Basin.
Yeah. Thank you. I suppose you're kind of putting words into my thinking by calling it a problem. I think we need to start almost like neutrally and just consider the push and pull factors. What are the issues at play? My way of thinking is that the way society is organized as of now is through the accounting unit, what I call an accounting unit of the nation state. And I think a lot of issues that we deal with have to do with that architecture. So if you are an elected official in a nation state, your primary responsibility is to the citizens of that geography. You are not responsible for the people next door. It's just the way it is. The people who are going to call you to account are your citizens. And a lot of things flow from that. So that's the starting point. So if I run a country and I need talent, as you've just pointed out about Germany, I'm going to look for that talent wherever I can get it, in competition with everybody else. So there will be that element to it. Then the next point we need to recognize is that if the people we're talking about have made an investment in their education, they are going to attempt to get a good return for that investment. So they'll go to whatever geography they can find where they'll get a return which they consider to be appropriate to the investment they've made. The converse of that is that if you're running a country and you don't run that country attractively enough, don't be surprised if your people leave and go somewhere else where there is attractiveness. And on the slightly positive side is fact, and my country is a very typical example of this. For many years now, Zimbabwe has stayed afloat primarily because of remittances from the people who've left. So we've educated them, we've lost them, so to speak, exported them, and there are a lot of remittances that as they look after their relatives, they send back to the money to the country, and the economy, to a very large extent, is kept afloat because of that. And there is a secondary interesting issue. So if the people left back home perceive that there is a demand for doctors somewhere else, there will be a temptation to go and train as doctors. So you actually stimulate further demand for training in a particular skill in the home country. So it's a complex issue, and I don't think it's straightforward at all. Before we rush to say it's either good or bad, we would have literally to do the mathematics or the addition of all of these components. And my view is that I'm pretty agnostic, and I look at it, it's the responsibility of the home country to create an environment that retains the investment it's made in the people. And if you don't do that, don't blame anybody else when those people up and go to where they can get a better return for their country, okay, for their investment.
Thank you. Let me see if the audience is agnostic as well. A quick show of hands. How many of you are living and working in your countries of origin? Okay. And how many of you are living and working elsewhere? It looks like it's slightly more of us are living and working outside our countries of origin. And so, Cassie, I'll go to you next because you live and work in your country of origin.
I do indeed. And let me say that it really has been very helpful, the town halls, because I think it just reiterated the importance of the questions that are raised have everything to do with the recommended solutions and outcomes, and who gets to participate in those. So I want to suggest today that around brain drain, that we need to be raising a whole different set of questions. One is we have to ask, how has work been restructured since, post-COVID? People now, a large percentage of people work remotely. So how will that impact on brain drain, for sure? We need to ask what impact has and will technology and AI have on workforce development. We definitely need to know, when we're in this conversation, whether the data are keeping pace with the current employment trends and needs across countries. We have to figure out, I think, better how true partnerships can develop around migration issues and other issues related to brain drain. Because let's be clear, migration and both moving in and moving out have a lot of different factors, including cultural factors, and that we need not deny, and we need to spend a lot more time thinking about. And we need to think about and talk about really what are going to be the workforce trends or needs going forward. So are we in 2 years or 10 years going to still need researchers, medical scientists? as we are now, with especially there being different ways and needs, how we can utilize that remotely and across countries. And true partnerships, I think, are important between the education realm, which I hope to come back to that for sure, educational realm and the workforce development needs. But let me just end at this moment with saying that there are a lot of issues that relate to, obviously, workforce development, but there have been significant changes in how work is done and how it will be shaped going forward. And we need to really put that in perspective, I think.
Okay. So Cassie, you've taken us into the future of work. You've talked about migration, and previous panels have talked about the effects of different governance models on and how they pressure their citizens to leave. We've also heard from the audience at various times this talk about people looking for meaning, whether it's in terms of their citizenship, whether it's in terms of work. Mm-hmm. And so, Paulo, you are from Guinea-Bissau, but you work between Senegal and Singapore. Okay? So, Singapore gains, Senegal gains, but Guinea-Bissau seems to have lost out on the brilliance that you have cultivated over your career. Is that unfair?
Well, difficult to say is unfair. I think Kosana was saying that if you don't create the right environment for people to want to stay and work in the country, you end up having an army of frustrated people, and you will be wasting those brains. And probably in case of my country, with the wave of instability and some of the conflict, we have lost a lot of our talents. We had that brain drain. One concrete example is that a very funny scheme is that because of our relationship with Cuba in the past, we trained a lot of very good medical doctors in Cuba, funded by the Cubans. And they were so well trained that they ended up coming back in the country, were frustrated, and they went to Portugal. So today in Portugal, we have a sample of 200 to 250 top doctors in Portugal. So on that one, I will say I'm concerned, because when it comes to brain drain, I would like to structure what kind of brains you're losing. And for me, the brains you lose in terms of public goods, and I will range the public goods in terms of education and health, are those that I feel that is unfair and can hurt the country. On the others, I will be less concerned. Your previous panel was about artificial intelligence. It seemed to me that artificial intelligence and everything coming around technology are just accelerating and making the knowledge global. So at the end of the day, I think the way I will see the brain drain today and the brain drain 20 or 30 years ago, when it was the main topic of the UN discussion, brain drain, and many people made money about that issue, consultant. Today, I don't think that concern is there. But I think if you have that massive brain drain on things related to what I call, again, what we call public goods and the economy of life, which is education and health, then it can hurt. And then if you cannot also build that capacity to regulate, because I think, again, with technology, for me, the main things that any country in particular is to learn how you regulate, because that's something that I believe will be very specific on the country and essentially with artificial intelligence, but even globally. So I will put all the energy in terms of that. The rest is just being a small country. We are just 2 million people, which is the equivalent of a neighborhood in Lagos, Ikoyi or something. The temptation to go out, to breathe, and to express yourself is very big. But again, in a more serious way, I think that this can be an opportunity sometime to have other people to train your people, and also how the brain process is also creating opportunity for saving. You are talking about remittances. is huge. If you look at a country like Senegal, a country like my own country, the amount of resources, because we have a big deficit in saving. And the saving is being kind of lodged up with the resources coming from abroad.
Okay. Paolo, thank you, because you've introduced to us brain train, because there's brain drain, brain gain, and brain train. You've also sort of laid out the challenges for us. Kosana, I'll come back to you, because remember, what we're talking about is harnessing the potential and ensuring that everybody wins. So what should we be thinking about in terms of ensuring that people can, that the responsibility of governments to their citizens is met, but the individual responsibility to actualize your full potential is also met?
Yeah. Again, I don't think we can get away. You know, the word governance has been mentioned in many different sessions here. I think for as long as we don't get leaders in our countries who are alive to these issues, who understand that the people who've got opportunities to actually go elsewhere are probably the cream of our populations. So it's not just a technical skill they've got. It's also mobilization, management, planning. All of these skills are the skills we're losing, not just the technical element. But ultimately, the people who are given the responsibility for harnessing the resources of a nation state are the people who are called leaders, who sadly in our instances often are rulers rather than leaders. That is their responsibility, to understand that they've got to create an environment where the human capital that they've invested in as a country stays to give the other citizens a return. That responsibility cannot be put elsewhere. It resides with the leaders of the country.
But we're having this conversation because that responsibility is not being met. And so therefore, how do we ensure that if people are moving around, when you hear the UK officials saying, we're going to slash immigration by ensuring that you need a higher salary to meet the threshold for immigration, or we want you to come, but we don't want your families to accompany you.
But I think we're focusing on the wrong side of this dynamic. So the other side can create gates, but what that implies is if they want you, they'll let you get through the gate. So if you are the trainer, the country where the people are living, you can't take comfort from the fact that the other side will control that for you, because they'll control it to meet their needs. I mean, let me give you an example. So once I went to the UK and I met with a group of professionals, and a lady doctor told me that in a class of 65 medical trainees back in Zimbabwe, 43 of them were now specialists in the UK. So for as long as the UK needed medically trained people, they would open the gates. So it doesn't do you any good. The responsibility lies with you back home to create an environment that retains your talent.
Well, I think I will even add on this. Again, he gave the example of things related to health. And again, I don't box health and education in the same in terms of importance of brain drain. When it's health, I think it's really hurt. For example, you have in the US one of the best surgeons who has managed, a Nigerian one, who has managed to be one of the experts in everything on surgery. He's the one who has managed to operate a fetus from the womb of a woman. If you look at Elon Musk, he's an African, you know, although he's white. Is it a brain drain for him to leave South Africa and did what he did? I think, by the way, has done so much in terms of climate change, but what he has done in terms of EVs. And he ended up having an impact as a public good. Is it a brain drain for South Africa? Will Elon Musk be as impactful had he decided to stay in South Africa? So I think the world is changing so fast, and the acceleration of things, that at the end of the day, I prefer to look at the things in what extent a powerful brain in Zimbabwe can have an impact in terms of a public good, with the world that we are facing, where we are all concerned about our children's and what's going to happen. So it seemed to me that the power of the brain, it's what's count, and essentially if that power of the brain will have a positive impact on the global world. And again, I give the example of Elon Musk, but I'm sure there are many. You don't see him in COP28. He wasn't in making speech and greenwashing and other things, but his impact in terms of what he has done in technology for EV, it's enormous. It's enormous, and I think if we continue to make progress in terms of mobility and other things, it will have been very positive for the rest of the world.
Cassie, take us into the future, if you will, because you brought us, you introduced remote work, virtual environments, asked us what our needs would look like in about 10 years. What are we missing?
I think for sure that my colleagues and most people, when they're thinking about brain drain, are absolutely on point for now. But I think the workforce needs going forward are going to be quite different from what they are now, and the way in which people work. There'll be more people who working remotely, so the need will not be for people to move necessarily between countries or borders. But there are other drivers, certainly, that we have to deal with, that need to be addressed around migration and treating individuals fairly and equitably when they are moving across borders. So we need to separate, though, I think, from where we are now to where we are going to be going in the future with different workforce needs, how we're going to address those. And one thing I have to add into this, because I mentioned to my colleagues earlier today, is we really don't want to leave out education done differently. Because generally when people are talking about brain drain, they are talking about investing more in research and development in academic or higher education side. But what about beginning conversations around brain drain, if you need, and what that meant, because it will be different going forward, across different countries. One of the things that we have been really proud of with our work is that we established the first and currently only African diaspora content with an advanced placement seminar. That has gone global. So can you imagine now when students in secondary schools are talking about the issues that we are talking about, not only about brain drain, but across these different countries? That's the way we have to go. Starting anything at at higher education level is late. But so I'll stop at that. But definitely, we need to certainly consider all the things that we are saying now about brain drain. But that's the now, because 10 years out, offices might be closed. People will be working at home across borders and countries, and that's what we have to plan and prepare for, not for just the now.
Okay.
So can I just check on my friend here?
Okay.
So, the concept of global public goods, that's idealism. The whole reason why we have this discussion, why it's called Atlantic grouping, whatever I want to call it, the geography, it's because we're still caught up in nation-state architecture. Mm-hmm. That's why there is the competition for talent. If, in fact, all the talent of humanity was globally available, then the competition wouldn't happen, because then everybody would access it. Mm-hmm. The reality is that the nation-state architecture still makes this talent almost owned by that geography. Mm-hmm. And the benefits flow by and large to where these people reside. Mm-hmm. There may be spillover effects and so on, but we cannot deny there is a loss when you train people, mm-hmm. and you don't look after them and you lose them. You can't take comfort in saying, oh, there is global public goods being created. Your citizens won't let you get away with it. That's part of why there is dissatisfaction and people vote parties in and out, because ultimately the unit of account is the nation state. The unit of accountability is the nation state.
That's true, Asana. You know, we
Paulo?
worked together for many years. So
Yeah.
I will take the example of his own country again. Zimbabwe doesn't have a deficit of people who have the brain in social science to lead the country and do policy change.
He actually
And the
ran
problem
for
in our
president.
countries at this point is not the brain drain about capability in scientific thing, is the deficit of leadership in our country, because the people who could be in public policy to design positive and impactful public policy are not staying in the country. Yeah. And it's a pure example. So there's no shortage of brains in terms of public policy design in Zimbabwe.
Actually, there is.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, sorry, I would like us to move forward. The word cloud is not working, but I'd like us to turn our attention to the mobility schemes and what we need to be thinking about, because we recognize that whether it's the nation state that is losing its people or the nation state that is, going on tour trying to woo people to its destination, something is broken in the system. Yeah. Whether or not people come in and move on, or local workers feel disenfranchised, what should we be thinking about in terms of ensuring that there is mobility? Nkosana, you wanted to be president of Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would have run it in such a way that I would retain people who would willingly stay to develop the country, not be forced by some legal framework. Create an environment that is attractive for people to stay.
Okay, so the young people are clicking for you. That means that they're agreeing with you. And my question is, and they already have questions for you. My question to you is, what would you have done to ensure that they stay? And for those who are outside, the doctor you were talking about, whether she's a lady or not is not relevant, but the doctor you were talking about, what would you have done to ensure that even while the UK is gaining the benefits of Zimbabwean brains, as Paulo puts it, that they're still able to, beyond their remittances, contribute to Zimbabwe? What does that look like?
Again, now we're back to how should you run a society to make people want to be part of that society? People want to see fairness. They want order. They want security. They want an environment where there is health issues and education, infrastructure that works. So it's investing at country level. Don't worry, if I'm running Zimbabwe, I'm not running Zambia, I'm running Zimbabwe, okay? So it means I must provide these things: law and order, infrastructure that works, security, that people can go to sleep and not be afraid that they're going to be robbed. All of those things are things you need to do for your society, for people to feel comfortable that they can stay.
Okay.
And when you look across our continent, we don't have to name countries, the large reason why we're losing people is because we're not running our countries properly. It's as simple as that.
Paulo, I invite you to tackle Nkosana.
Well, it's true. I mean, he has a point. He has a point, but you have to create the right environment for people to stay in the country. But I think we are competing with the rest of the world in terms of talent. The big GAFAs, for example, are just like sucking the talent in the country. I was talking to my friend Didier, was telling me how Google's and Facebook and all the things are just sucking the talents from our countries to use and create value, and that value goes back to their shareholders. It's not staying in our country. So we have a challenge on that.
So is there a problem then with the citizens who are lured away, who haven't found creative ways of returning value to their countries of origin?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm saying I have no problem with that. I will be more concerned about the absence of capability in our countries to run or to design public policies to change the country. That's why I will have a concern about the so-called brain drain.
Okay.
On the other, where you're competing with technology is coming, the acceleration of artificial intelligence, that one you cannot stop. And if it can have an impact on public good globally, I'm okay.
Okay.
But I agree with Kosana that our challenge is how do you create the right environment for people to stay. By the way, you cannot stop them to run away. You're not going to put a guard or special forces at each meter of the border to prevent them to go. I mean, in Zimbabwe, you know that. I mean, one of the best brains you have in the financial service in South Africa are Zimbabweans. They're good, they receive a good training, and you cannot stop them. So he has a point, but at the end of the day, again, is to see how to adapt on the changing world. I'm a proponent of, public good globally, I believe, because I'm from a small country, so in terms of scale, I need to be inserted in something bigger, but I'm also Pan-African. And that's why in my own experience, I've been navigating from country B to country C, because at the end of the day, I think it can have an impact for an African to move together.
Okay.
And I'm not limited by the border of my country.
Right, thank you. Cassie, what should these mobility schemes look like? I mean, the US has the H-1B visas, the O visa class, artist visas. Canada allows families to join each other. There's an accelerated fast-track route to citizenship and residency if you study in certain countries. What should we be doing to ensure that countries of origin in the Atlantic Basin benefit from people moving around?
Well, I think there are probably examples of countries having their citizens return, providing stipends and research. I think India does something like that, and that's seemed to work well with them, for them. And Ghana, I think, at least from the U.S. perspective, the way they have invited African descendants both into their country and invited their citizens to return, I think has worked well. So I think that's one way in which people, countries can gain a lot from the very fact that people have studied abroad, not studied abroad, but have lived abroad, but that they have brought things back. Because imagine the skill sets and partnerships that come back when individuals are returning to countries. I mean, our two colleagues are outstanding examples of that. So I do think that, again, education at every level plays a really important role. But I do think the last point is that we might want to look a little, take a look at migration almost not as a separate issue, but there are individuals, countries, and individuals. There are cultural factors also. Let me just say that there are cultural factors also that are part of the discussions that I think that if students and individuals learn earlier that, yeah, I might go to the U.S., but hey, they might have, they have police brutality and issues that are complicated to address too. And so maybe if I learn in advance a little bit of what those cultural issues are, I might want to stay in my own country, but if not, if I go to that country, I might want to return. But having those return programs in place, I think, would improve.
Return schemes. Okay, let's open up the floor for questions. And I'll start on this side. There's a lady here. If we could get a microphone to her, please.
Thank you so much. An incredibly interesting panel and very timely, but I feel that you only have half a panel up there. Because when you have this discussion, I think it is imperative that you must have someone from government giving you the alternative or what are the issues they're dealing with. I understand that, Mr. Nkosana, that you were running for leadership, but to this I would suggest look at President Obama when he was running for presidency and look at him after he got the presidency. You can have dreams of what you want to do, and then the reality that hits you once you have the position of what it is that you are actually able to do. I'm from Malaysia. I'll bring in the example of Malaysia. We've got brain drain. Is it because there aren't enough good things happening in the country? I don't think so. because what we could offer our doctors, let's just say we offer our doctors 5,000, and another country also offers the same doctor 5,000. What is different is the unit of currency. So what I'm paying for 5,000, it's in ringgit. Maybe Australia is paying is 5,000 Australian dollars, and it's worth 3 times more. Is it that our healthcare is worse in Malaysia? No. In 2019, Malaysia was voted as having the best healthcare in the world. Even then, our
I'll interrupt you to ask, if you've got the best healthcare and you're exporting doctors, is there a crisis in your healthcare system in Malaysia? Or do you retain a core?
We do, yes, we do, but we are losing brains in other sectors.
Okay.
And say in education, we are ranked as having we are number 12 in attracting foreign students in Malaysia. So there isn't a problem with education. And even then, we're still losing it. So the question needs to be raised from the government angle. And one of the things I really think it's high time that this becomes an agenda at the United Nations to deal with it. We shouldn't stop our people who have better opportunities elsewhere until we are able to catch up. Okay. But if this continues happening, developing countries will never be able to catch up. So there must be a mechanism put in place.
And that's what we're trying to get to. So sorry, there are lots of people who would like to ask questions. Ottaviano?
Thank you, Ottaviano, Policy Center for the New South. Fantastic discussion. Thank you for that. I want to call attention to the fact that there is a homework that can mitigate the issue of brain drain. I will give you a concrete example, South Korea. South Korea has policies through which Koreans that go outside and increase their human capital, working, for instance, in the U.S., have the opportunity to return and open their business because the business environment allows for that. And there is a win-win in the sense that the learning that they have outside is used back by the country. There is also the possibility of a managed migration. It's a toxic word. I know this because when I was VP at the World Bank, I tried to create a unit, a migration policy unit. I started receiving visits from DFID and from the Minister of Migration from Norway. And they all praised the initiative. But then I asked, okay, will you support me with money? And they said, well, that I can't because of the political sensitivity of the issue. But Australia and New Zealand have schemes of managed migration through which the agreements include the return after a certain time of the people to their original countries. So there are policies that depend on the source and also particularly effective when they integrate both sides of the equation.
Thank you for adding that to us. We'll go to this side, and this gentleman right in front of me has a question. And then,
if you allow me, I will speak in French.
Okay.
Oh, wire up.
Yeah.
Comment.
Okay. Please keep it as short as you can so that other people, as you can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe that in this global world, freedom of circulation can never be stopped. And in emerging countries, you cannot prevent a higher executive to try to enhance their knowledge. And I would like to address a more concrete, topic that concerns me, that concerns Morocco, and that I might be a little provocative here. We have emerging industries, and what we note is that we are training talents, and these talents seem to be, there's a real brain drain, and they are captured by the North. So how can you ensure your development if in these emerging industries there's more and more of this brain drain? Madam earlier was saying that half of the speakers are missing from this panel. I believe that on this panel there should also be panelists from countries in the North, because we need to find mechanisms or a way to ensure that in these emerging countries that specific training that is required by the North, and that would also be partially, at least, paid for by the North, given that these people end up in the North. Because not only does this help to trade, I mean, not only is this beneficial for the emerging country, but for exports. What we know today is that agencies come intentionally to capture these resources and these talents.
Do you have a question or a comment?
Brief comment. So we talk about healthcare. I'm a surgeon in the US. I'm a Cameroonian. And there are many things that we are missing in this debate. Now, we're still talking about brain drain. I think that conversation is before 2000, the whole issue of brain drain. There is a lot more circulation of brain right now rather than the brain living. The reason why we are talking about brain drain is because of what Kosana is saying. The countries where the brains are living, the governments, for a lack of a better word, they suck. They don't get after the diaspora to be able to ensure that those connections. I'll give you a quick example. Cameroon, they're trying to open kidney transplantation. All the kidney doctors in Cameroon, they say, well, hold on, we don't have the skill. We don't have the skill for that. Doctors, Cameroonian doctors in London and the US say, oh, no, we can solve that problem. Believe me, transplantation is happening in Cameroon now. Because of what? Because of the diaspora. So all this talk that we're talking about here the missing link is the fact that our governments, for lack of a better word, they suck. They can actually use their diaspora for their development, and they just don't do it. That's the point.
Thank you. Pass the microphone to the back. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stella. I'm part of the ADEL fellowship for this year. And being a Kenyan that lives abroad, in both ways, both work and school, is that our institutions are not developed to carry the capacity and the weight of the new technologies that are coming up. I work in a sector of geospatial, and I can tell you for a fact, in Kenya, it's a struggling industry. So the outside our countries, and especially in the European, understand such technology. Secondly, is the assurance of a job sector that can actually fit our payrolls in terms of the investments of what we have gained. And this transition is still not yet happening in many of the governments, even though this discussion is still going on. Thank you.
Sorry, pass the microphone on, but still I have a question for you, because the gentleman from Cameroon has just given us an example of how people like you, diaspora, people like me, because I'm now in the diaspora, solved the problem. They ignored the government and dealt with it at source. So if you say that you work in a highly specialized environment, surely you have the capacity to ensure that more people are capacitated to develop that specialty.
Yes, that's a true point. And currently we are coming up with a chapter that allows the government to absorb our kind of courses in various institutions, not only at the bachelor level, but at higher levels, so that many other young people can come into it.
Thank you. Okay. We'll come to this side, and let's start at the back and then work our way forward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chineye Owanaka from Nigeria, and I'm also one of the emerging leaders. So my question around brain drain is in twofold. The first part is, we have the issue of poverty, right? Poverty in Africa, right? And if you look at the US, for instance, there are men who built the US, entrepreneurs, innovators, like the Bill Gates, even from the past, the JP Morgans, the Fords. And I always say we need men to build Africa.
I believe we need women as well.
Oh, sorry. Precisely. When I say men, I'm using it for both.
Contributed to the building of the United States.
For the United States. I just meant men the way the Bible says men for men and women. So basically, you're right. Because I'm also someone who's a nation builder, and I'm a woman as well. But the point I'm trying to make is, when we talk about brain drain, yes, the talent, they'll go where the money is and where the opportunities are. But if we really want to solve our problems and create wealth on the continent, we need ownership. I'll tie this to the second part of my comment, which has to do with intellectual property and the ownership of the unicorns, for instance. Most of the tech unicorns in Africa, in fact, 90-something% of the startups are registered in Delaware. So they service the markets in Africa, but they're owned and the investors put the money in the US. So the way we have in Nigeria, the Zenith banks, the GT banks of before, now all those fintechs are no longer Nigerian or African. So how do we juxtapose that with, yes, people will move, the government is failing, and they would leave because the environment is not conducive for ease of doing business, and there are no incentives. But how do we come out of poverty if the people who are meant to create the solutions and the innovations are leaving?
Okay,
So that's my
thank
question.
You. The microphone to the front, yes. The lady right there.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier the fact that people normally or talents need to willingly want to stay in their country and not in a forced way. So my question is, how do you believe government can form policies or build infrastructures in a way that they tackle all industries in a fair way without having, because countries usually tend to prioritize some fields or industries over others, while the talents can be all around the place. So how can we create fairness to keep all of them, or at least be fair to all of them in all infrastructure industries?
Okay, thank you. Please pass the microphone forward. Yes, thank you.
I was just listening to the panel. Marcos Freitas from Brazil. And I have already lived in my life in 8 countries for a long time. And during the pandemic, I live in 8 different places. You probably heard about the digital nomads that were around, and people kept telling me. And one of the places I spent a lot of time was in Georgia. Now, Georgia is not the most developed country of Europe. So I think that instead of talking about brain drain, we have a world of young people that could live easily in any of the countries in the world if they have 3 things. 1, a safe place. That's what we need to be. The first contract that we have with the state is providing security. If the state is not providing security, we don't have a state. That's the first thing. Second thing, taxes have to be low. If we have lower taxes, people are going to move there.
Or at the very least, your taxes are not stolen.
Huh?
At the very least, your taxes, even if they're high,
but,
are working for you.
If the taxes are lower, people are going to, they'll have less money to steal. But taxes have to be low. And third, you need to, build a basic infrastructure so people feel safe when they're there. They have a hospital, they have a good airport. People are not asking for living. I wouldn't like to live in the United States again in my life. But, there are many people who would like to live in different places. There are many wonderful places in Africa, anywhere in the world, that I'm sure would attract this huge amount of nomad people that are around. There are dedicated technology. And the 4th requirement I mentioned is that you have to have good internet. If you have these 4 things, you are going to get a bunch of people, and instead of being worried about your brain leaving, you're going to be attracting many brains and perhaps a lot of money with that. So I said, that's the discussion I think we should really have. How do we attract brain to our countries? And I have to tell you, Estonia, it's not the US, Estonia, Ireland, Portugal, a few of these countries were doing exactly that. So let's look into these examples, perhaps to understand better what we can do so that we can follow and actually improve this.
Okay,
thank you.
Pass the microphone.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the panel. My name is Saïd El Hashimi. I lived also in the UK and I live in Switzerland, but I'm originally from Morocco.
Where do you live now?
In Switzerland.
In Switzerland, okay.
And I had the privilege to discuss with members of my community in Switzerland, diaspora. And I think there's a readiness to contribute. If there is a good kind of arrangement, for example, if there is a clear purpose why a person that lives in France or in Switzerland, why they would come back to their country of origin, in terms of duration, would they be transferring some knowledge? I think the idea that we kind of discuss is whether is it possible to have some ecosystem where in destination countries, people can come back to their countries of origin and contribute to innovation, and things like that. So that's my number one thing that I want to listen maybe to the panel. The second one, and I'm taking off my hat as an international diplomat, is whether we should be looking to balance the relationship between country of origin and country of destination, thinking about probably a quote-unquote a compensation agreement where the country that is a destination of that knowledge would contribute, invest back in the sectors that are really needing for these emerging countries, be it in innovation hubs, etc. So, but it will be some kind of a formalized, structured relationship before those kind of agencies just come and suck whatever brain is there. Thank you.
Okay, so let's answer this round of questions. And panelists, you can see that there's a lot of there are a lot more questions and comments to go through. Nkosan, I felt like they were kind of talking to you.
So I'm going to take them back to front because I'm an old man, I forget easily. So and I'm going to be provocative. So you are running country A, I'm running country B, your people run away from you, they come to me, why should I pay you? I can refuse because I'm not forcing your people to come to me, they are leaving you and coming to me. So I hear you, but I think it's fraught with difficulty in terms of human rights and all sorts of things. So infringing, yeah, it can be done, I think, but I don't think it's that straightforward. That's what I would say, yeah. The lady from Nigeria, are you one of the young leaders? Okay. So now you're forcing me to go political on you, the young people of the continent. The African demographic says you are in the majority, and you keep electing stupid people to run our countries. But that's a fact. No. So it's because young people are not prepared to make the investment. Firstly, mobilize, go and vote, and protect your vote. And when it's stolen, protest. You don't do any of those things. And then you complain. Who is going to create it for you? You've got the numbers. The demographics say, if young people of this continent put their minds to it, yes, you won't succeed 100% of the time, but most of our countries would change within 10 years. So I think you should challenge yourselves to invest in creating the future that's going to work for you. At the moment, I don't think you are, as a group. Not personally, but as a group. Emerging industries and IP and all of that. So again, it's the similar issue. Most of the people who are running Africa today, I would argue, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, go and ask them what IP means and see how many of them will know what IP means. Why do you elect them? To run countries in this day and age, and I don't want to name countries, but you can do your own analysis and see the mismatch between where the world is today and the complexity of the world, technology, and all of this advancement we're talking about, and the people that we keep electing to run those countries. There is a mismatch. So I think we need to take responsibility for creating the countries that will work the way we want them to work.
There was a question about the mechanisms that around specific training from the North.
Let me just try it. Okay. I made a note of some of this.
Okay.
There's a gentleman there who made a point about freedom of circulation. So let me take a step back. Let's not misunderstand. There is global circulation. Even within the Western world, there is a movement of professionals. So there will be people from the US who come to Europe and vice versa. Right. So this is understood. What we're talking about is that when you look at proportionality, Africa loses about 3 times the number of professionals compared to this basic, if you want, baseline circulation. It's that disproportionality that should concern us. And the only way to counter that, like I said, is to create an environment where people choose to stay, not where they are forced to stay. The other complexity is that when you look at countries like South Korea that has been mentioned, look at India, and look at Cameroon, as my friend over there mentioned, there are countries that have understood that even when a citizen leaves the country, it does not mean that you cannot create a system to make them contribute.
Yeah.
And these countries like India, South Korea, they've done this. Whether it's investment, they create all sorts of incentives.
Exactly.
And there are countries where, if you look at the medical profession, doctors who reside somewhere else, when maybe once a year on a rotational basis, come and serve their community, willingly, not in a forced way. So it can be done, but the bottom line is that you as a source country, firstly, you have to regard your citizens, no matter where they are, in a manner that continues to make them feel they are welcome and they are part of your society. In some countries, the political system says once you leave my country, you are an enemy, and I consider you as a potential. You know, that's why some countries, for instance, don't give the vote to diaspora, because they automatically assume you'll vote for the opposition. So there is all these nuances about the attitudes that are behind how governments, Then there was the Malaysia issue. Exchange, that Malaysia is losing professionals in the medical field. But I think the lady who asked the question, you are mixing also the issues of exchange rate mechanisms. I can assure you that most people who leave Zimbabwe, in terms of quality of life, they would much sooner stay in Zimbabwe when you look at the package of the quality of life, weather, and all of these things, than go and live in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's not just about money. It's a whole package of a number of things. Yeah? Then there was the challenge about, yes, when you're campaigning, your perception of reality is not always the same as when you get into office, like Obama was quoted. That is true, but I think by and large, there are leaders where, if you look at the track record, you can tell whether it's somebody you should have elected in the first place or not. And sadly, on the continent, we are still using patronage, i.e., I'll support you provided you're going to do something for me at a personal level as opposed to develop my country and society. We have to take responsibility. Until we as citizens take responsibility for what we can do, what we can control, nothing much is going to change.
Thank you very much. Paulo, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think Kosana has a point on a couple of them. I would just disagree on the youth. I think it's our generation that has to fix the things for them to have a more fertile ground to change things. I have seen many elections where the youth have engaged and mobilized themselves, but as she was saying, there's rigging the election, and there's also violence. We are now facing in many of our African countries, at least in the West, a whole phenomenon of army taking over. It's important for us, I think, from our generation, to prepare the ground to face the challenges we have now, where military people think that they can run the country. And military is trained to defend the country. But because of the lack of credibility of our elite, people think now that basically it's better to have an army man to run the country. So I think we need to forge a new engagement with the society where we reassure them and create that trust that we as a civilians, we can do better than army people. So I think that aspect, we need to kind of work with the youth, prepare the ground for the next phase. I mean, once you have a coup, the people are there for 5, 6 to 10 years. So it's going to be a process of preparing really the ground to create the situation for the youth to take over. And I think on that aspect, I will not be so harsh with the youth in terms of their role. They are fighting, but they are fighting a much more complex context that we had in the past. On the rest, I trust, I agree with him, is that basically you need some sort of homework. Our main problem in Africa at this point is our own leadership and our capability to design policies and be the master of our own destiny. Obviously, there are some influence from abroad, and they will continue. But a lot of, I think, the amount of work that needs to be done is internal, and I think we need to face it.
Thank you.
Okay, just briefly, definitely now is the time to develop return schemes. But I think it's important to remember, again, that migration issues are still going to be issues that have to be dealt with.
Thank you. There were more questions from this side of the room. To the lady, yes, you've got your hand up. Put your hand up so that we can, okay. Take the mic, yes. Thank you, and then pass it on to her.
Hi, great panel, very fascinating and profound thoughts. So my name is Roxy Ndebamado. I'm based in the States, but I grew up in Nigeria. So my question is around value creation, or new modes of value creation. I genuinely do believe that many private sector companies follow changing consumer patterns, or changing consumer consumption patterns. And I think we've always failed as a diaspora in terms of looking at that as direct monetary impact, when sometimes that's measured by engagement metrics or, let's say, hours watched. And I do think that many private sector companies are leaning on the ability to co-create with citizens in different areas of the world, which is influencing changing consumer consumption patterns. And so my question to you is, how do you think about creating new value change so that we're not just focusing on solving brain drains through migration, but more so creating value chains for private sector companies to also come to you and create that where you are, so that people aren't always leaving and not coming back? Because that's what happened in my case.
Sorry, we're at 12 minutes.
That's okay,
Okay,
sure.
Thank you. Please pass the microphone on.
Hello, my name is Ale. I'm Egyptian and I'm ADL. I have a question. I really appreciate that you have talked about the future of work and how the disruption is happening. But I was wondering what type of policies as African countries that don't have a lot of technological penetration or internet penetration and can do to maneuver these this in the future, and embarking on the institutional change. Leaders that are leading these institutions, they don't know how to harness this technological. So what do we need to do other than educate them? What type of political change that needs to happen, or organizational change?
Okay, thank you. Laundry?
Landry Signé, Policy Center for the New South. Thank you for an extraordinary panel. So we have spoken a lot about the challenges, but would you mind elaborating about successful stories in Africa in particular, when some strategies were adopted for brain gain, which could be replicated in other places? Thank you.
Professor Kim?
Yes, very briefly. Yeah, I'm Kim Hong-jung from South Korea. And then I think that the brain drain, and then the migration is a completely different issue. So we don't have, we should not mix the two issues. And that's, I think that's misleading. And the second thing is that, highly talented people are highly mobile. Yeah, that's the fact. And so, I don't like the issues on brain drain, the terminology, because it just highlight one aspect of the big mountain. And so the fact is that highly mobile. So if a government of the country of origin want to do something with the highly talented people, then they should provide the more very decent job with perfect living environment for them. That's it.
Thank you. Microphone to the back, please. Yes.
Hello, Hibam from Morocco, AGL from 2015. It seems to me that the discussion has been, the underlying point is that talent is leaving after they've been trained. But I think that the trend is more that people are attracted to the training that's available outside of their country and then staying and not coming back. So is that something that I think that the opportunities to send them and to bring them back, and we've seen that in certain countries there are schemes that will pay for the education of the student in order for them, once they're done, to come back and work for the country and things like that. But I think that that's also something that's really important to discuss, that people don't just go, these future talents go to seek also education, mentoring, and early job creation or early stage education before coming back, and then end up not coming back.
Thank you. And there's a question right at the back. The gentleman, could you put your hand up, please, so we can see you? Yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Madam. You have put the focus, rightly so, on the governments in the countries of origin creating a right environment for people to stay. But the problem is to which extent actually this deprives, I mean, the mobility of skilled people deprives those countries of the human capital they need to develop, even with good governance. Because the problem is the global scramble for talent is a winner-takes-all game. And there are many and many more sectors, in many sectors. The best universities get the best talents, the richest countries get the highest skilled. So it is not only dependent on countries of origin, it is also dependent on the agglomeration economies created over time by this process. This is why, and technology is certainly not going to solve these issues. I mean, we have now 400 million unemployed youth in Africa, all of them with mobile phones. And I remember the same discussions with in relation to mobile phones.
Okay, sorry, what is your question? Because we're at 8 minutes.
I close. I think that it is important you ask for mobility schemes, ethical recruitment, investment, as this Sir has said, in developing skills in countries of origin in parallel to draining them. Second, a global system to compensate indeed countries, as we are already doing in the carbon emission rights, for instance.
Thank you so much. So panelists, I'll come back to you to respond and to make your closing thoughts, because we're at time. You see people leaving. It's time for dinner as well. And so you're struggling. You're competing with dinner.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm with you.
Where is that?
I was starting with, would you like to start, Cassie?
Yeah, let me just start because my colleagues have a little more to say. Whoever raised the issue about students studying in different countries and then staying in those particular countries. Well, there is movement around that. For example, very difficult for the numbers of international students I know has dropped in the U.S. During this particular period of time. So that is an issue, I think, that will require, again, as we're going forward, we'll be able to research and have a little bit more background information about what role that is going to play going forward. I want to keep coming back to this is where we are now, but the way in which the workforce development is shaping out, where people will not even have to leave to do their work. How the question is around how that is going to be, how we're going to impact that. And that goes back to, I guess, the question that someone raised about what really should happen when we are talking about, for example, like I'm saying, that we need to be thinking about a different set of questions and how we're going to address those. I think we need to, at this point, take a look, basically align the data that we currently have with what the projections are for the future, because we might see a very different picture of movement. The mobility issue is going to continue. That's just the key, but is that going to be the main or only driving force of mobility of the brain? Brain drain.
Thank you. Paulo?
Yeah, first, you have many functions in the government that you need to take care of. Don't try to overstretch yourself to try to control too many things. In the global competition worldwide for talent, you have to be focused on what you want to be a priority for you. So I will give up in terms of trying to compete with the global world about my talent. And go if you can. if I don't have the way to retain you, because at the end of the day, I will let you go and find a way for you to come back and be productive for the countries, either in terms of bringing saving, either in terms of bringing, like you were saying about some of the Moroccan in Switzerland, rather than having frustrated people in the country that you want to block for them to go out. Secondly, I will focus on this talent mechanism and strategy on project base. Instead of doing in a cross-cutting sectorial way, I will look as a public decision maker to crystallize that talent around a special project. Let's say that I want to be very good in something specific on genetics. I will set up a special project and make it as an enclave in which I will provide all the support, very high standard salary to the people in my country that I want to retain. So it will be very kind of driven by a specific project where I want to later on, eventually, with the private sector, create a partnership.
And that answers the private sector question.
Exactly. But you cannot try to be, I will say, horizontal and cross-cutting to control this. It's simply not possible to control it today. And also, artificial intelligence, again, has brought a new way to augment our knowledge. And I think let's kind of to adapt to that reality.
Okay.
Okay, so just a bit of clarification, I think. We are not talking about absolutism. In other words, there will always be movement, circulation. But there is a base level when you look at global trends, and then there is what is over and above. That difference is what I think we should be concerned about. Africa is losing more people than other regions are losing, and you can't legislate for it. People will always move unless you create an environment that they want to live with and live in. People who go out for training, there is nothing wrong with that, but it's when the number that choose not to come back is above the average of other regions that you have to ask yourself, why? There is actually a positive for people going to train elsewhere in terms of knowledge transfer. But if they don't come back at all, none of them come back, then you've got a problem. So my closing remark is that I really can't stress this enough. The only thing that is within your control if you're running a country is to run your country in such a way that your people want to stay in it rather than run away from you.
Thank you very much. So look, my takeaway from this is that we have no success stories to, within the Atlantic Basin around mobility and ensuring that countries of origin benefit from their talented and mobile workforce. This is what I'm hearing from the panel. And in terms of what we're taking forward, that answers your question, Landry, although you might have something to contribute regarding the Continental Free Trade Area and what's happening in terms of the mobility of Africans on the continent. I've heard, and he's left now, Taviano, suggesting that we go and look at other countries that have examples of return schemes and mechanisms. Paolo, you've talked about creating enclaves of excellence, which you then use to retain and attract talent. And your theme, consistent theme, Nkosana, has been good governance, leadership that looks after its people and makes them want to stay in the country. And so, gentlemen and lady, Cassie Freeman, Paolo Gomez, Nkosana Moyo, thank you very much for your time and your insights.
What a great moderator you are.
So we need
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our sessions for the day. We invite you to the Grand Foyer to meet with your breakout dinner POC, carrying a sign with the number and title of your dinner. Please check on your application the dinner to which you have been assigned following your selection. Buses will be heading from La Mamounia to the dinner venue.
South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org. Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 400 high-level participants will gather from more than 80 countries to delve into this year's theme, A More Assertive Atlantic, Its Meaning for the World. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org. Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 400 high-level participants will gather from more than 80 countries to delve into this year's theme, A More Assertive Atlantic, Its Meaning for the World. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org.